He dies. The will says his kids get everything, and then the state files a lawsuit for his wife. Not because the children did something wrong, not because anyone committed fraud, but because once Medicaid is paying for a surviving spouse, the government does not look at your story. It looks at your structure, and the structure says marriage makes two lives one financial unit. I'm sitting across from a couple in their late 70s and early 80s. They found each other late in life. They both came with families. She has 4 children, he has 6. They decided to get married, but not to blend everything. They did not start over. They did not retitle his house into both names. They did not merge bank accounts. They did it for companionship, to share the last chapter, and they believed they could keep the rest clean. Her assets go to her children. His assets go to his children. No drama. No disinheritance. Just what they thought was fair. So they sign wills. They keep accounts separate. His house stays in his name. Her savings stays in hers. On paper, it looks tidy. In real life, marriage does not just change who you love. It changes how the law classifies money. It collapses 2 balance sheets into one, especially when long-term care enters the picture. It starts the way it usually starts, slowly at first, then all at once. A fall, a hospital stay that runs longer than anyone expects, a diagnosis that turns maybe we can manage into we can't do this at home anymore. Suddenly the conversation is about safety. A nursing facility becomes necessary, and the cost is staggering. In some states, you can be staring at numbers like $16,000 a month. Not once, but every month, perhaps for years. The kind of expense that does not punish recklessness, it punishes time. Even careful people are not prepared for a bill that large for that long. So savings drain, and eventually someone asks, isn't this what Medicaid pays for? Should we apply? Do we apply for Medicaid nursing home benefits? A lot of people hear Medicaid and think, help. But Medicaid, when it comes to nursing home coverage, is not a gift. It's a test. It asks, what do you have? And when you're married, it does not ask that question of one person. It asks of both. Because for Medicaid eligibility, spouses are treated as a single financial unit. That is the part that slices through the unwritten, we kept things separate agreement. It's no longer his account and her account. It is the household. It does not matter whose name is on this statement. It does not matter whose paycheck funded it 20 years ago. It does not matter what the wills say. Medicaid is looking at the unit. So now the rules change fast. Assets are counted together. Limits apply. Transfers are scrutinized. And planning stops being a casual someday project and becomes a crisis conversation with a clock on it. Here's the emotional trap for late life couples. They're not building a life from scratch. They're protecting what already exists. They're trying to be fair to the children they had before they met. They're trying to do the decent thing. I will not take from yours, you will not take from mine. That feels respectful, but the law was not designed for that emotional intention. The law was designed around a default assumption. Marriage creates a minimum economic obligation between spouses. Some of those obligations are obvious when you're healthy. Some only appear when your care becomes expensive. And some only surface after death when you think the paperwork has already been done. Then the husband dies, and he does exactly what he said he would do. He leaves everything to his children. The will is clear. The beneficiaries are correct. The documents say what everyone expected them to say. His children believe this is the clean handoff their father promised. They're grieving. Now they can at least feel that one part of the world stayed orderly. But order is not the same thing as finality, because a new player shows up at the table, the state, not as a beneficiary, not as a family member, as an enforcer of a different rule. In many states, a surviving spouse cannot be completely disinherited, no matter what the will says. The rule is commonly called the elective share, and the reason it exists is not complicated. The law assumes marriage carries a minimum economic promise, even if the marriage was late in life, even if the money was separate, even if the couple shook hands and swore it would never get messy. The promise is built into the structure. So even though the husband left everything to his kids, the wife still has a legal right to claim a portion of his estate. Now add the nursing home, add Medicaid, and the state suddenly cares a lot about that promise. Because if Medicaid is paying for the surviving spouse, the agency can step in and pursue the spouse rights, whether the spouse is asking for it or not. That can be a real shock, and we are going to enforce them, and we are doing it because we are paying her bill. This is where families feel like the ground moves under them, because the children's perspective, everything happened already. Dad died, the will is clear, the beneficiaries are named, the plan was followed. So when the state asserts an elective share claim, it feels like time is being reversed. It also feels personal, but it is not. It is procedural, and procedures have teeth. The estate is pulled into court. Assets that were supposed to pass cleanly are suddenly frozen. The kids cannot just wrap it up. They're told that they cannot distribute the property. Sometimes they're told that they cannot sell. Sometimes the house that felt like a settled part of their inheritance becomes a piece on a board they did not know they were playing on. Legal fees accumulate. Timeliness stretches on. The emotional cost rises because every month the nursing facility bill is still running in the background. Grief turns into suspicion. Phone calls become accusations. Someone says she is taking Dad's money. Someone else says the government is stealing from us. Why didn't the lawyer tell them when they made their wills? And in the middle sits a surviving spouse who may not even be the one pushing the claim, who may be in a facility, confused, embarrassed, or simply not in charge of her own case anymore. That is what makes this scenario so brutal. No one has to be the villain for it to destroy a family. The kids say the lines you hear in almost every version of this story. But he already died. But the will was clear. But they planned. And this is the hard truth. Inheritance planning and Medicaid planning are not the same thing. A will controls what happens at death. Medicaid rules control what happens in the years before death and what can be pulled back into the conversation afterward. A will can be perfectly drafted and still be powerless against the wrong eligibility structure. The law does not award points for devotion. It does the default thing. This is not about punishment. It is about design. The system is built to prevent one spouse from being left impoverished while the other spouse has assets bypass the cost of care. It is built to stop families from shifting the full weight of the long-term care onto taxpayers while private assets remain untouched. You can disagree with that design, but you cannot change it with good intentions. Intent does not control, the law does. And late-life marriages are especially vulnerable because they're walking into defaults that were created for a different kind of marriage. A first marriage, a marriage where wealth is built together, a marriage where ours is the assumption from day one. But that is not what is happening here. Here, ours is the legal default, applied to a life that emotionally feels like yours and mine, at least financially. This mismatch is where the damage lives. And this is why the plan that we will just do the separate wills is so often a false sense of security. It's not a plan at all. Wills are downstream documents. They describe where you want things to go after death. They do not rewrite the obligations that exist while you're alive. They do not erase elective share rights just because everyone agreed to keep things separate. They do not stop a state agency from caring about the spouse's legal entitlements when public benefits are paying for care. The quiet danger zone is not probate. It is the collision of marriage, long-term care, and public benefits. That is the crossroads where timing matters, where titles matter, where beneficiary designations matter, where the structure you set up either matches your real life or fights it. If you're in a late life relationship, here's the part worth sitting with. The problem is not that people getting married for love. The problem is that people treat marriages like a private promise, where the law treats it like a financial contract, and contracts come with defaults. Some you can plan around, some you cannot ignore. Marriage does not just give you a spouse. It gives the state a framework. And when Medicaid enters the picture, that framework becomes enforceable. The real issue is not that the government took something. The real issue is that the family built a plan around intention, and the system only recognizes structure. When those two do not match, structure wins. I'm Jesse Bifulco, host of Lifecast, the Life Counsel podcast. Please like and subscribe.